How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
This episode's going to be a lot of fun since we all feel like a bag of hammered buttholes.
A can of smashed assholes.
That's
from The Arrival. Do you remember that movie, The Arrival, the Charlie Sheen one?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I feel like a can of smashed assholes. I've always remembered that line for some reason. I don't remember anything else about the movie except for the alien's weird knees. Feels like a good description.
It does. Well, I mean, that's what a lot of being hungover does. Like, you get time to practice and come up with fun phrases.
You think are you saying Charlie Sheen ad-libbed that? Probably. It's probably legitimately how I felt that day.
That's
true. They just didn't even know the camera was going.
Well, hello.
That's how I feel today.
Yeah. Welcome to Cinema Shock, the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm your co-host, Gary Horne.
Hey, I'm Justin Bishop. We're joined today by, I don't even have it in me to come up with anything. Mr. Todd Davis is here today. Welcome to the show,
Davis. Hey, everybody.
This is going to be a good one for the listeners. The reason that we were at a bachelor party last night for frequent guest DJ. We're all old, and so today we woke up just feeling. I feel like a piece on Ed Gein's titty couch. That's what I feel.
Oh man, I bet that couch would be like really comfortable to be taking a nap on right now.
Oh yeah,
honestly.
I wouldn't turn it down. Not today.
Hey, we're gonna do our best though. We're gonna do our best to educate everyone on the next film in our.
That's our level of commitment to you, the listeners.
Yeah, we could have put this off. We could have not recorded today, but we did. But we're doing it anyway. Whether that's a good idea or not remains to be seen. But we're here and we're doing it. And we're in episode 4. Yes, episode 4 of The Tragedy of Tobe Hooper. Are you guys enjoying the ride so far?
I always enjoy rides with you guys.
Yeah, it feels like this is how it's bad. Like, I feel like there's a joke to be made about the Funhouse and a ride, and I don't have it, man.
Gary, I don't know. You just want to read my notes today? I'm going to go take a nap.
Back when Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel. No, I'll let you guys do it.
So back when Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel were under contract with Universal, we're just going to start. Okay, are you guys good? We're just starting.
I feel good about it.
Yeah,
okay. Go ahead.
Back when Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel were under contract with Universal, one of the many unmade projects that they were attached to was a remake of the classic Howard Hawks sci-fi movie, The Thing from Another World. You guys have seen it, I'm sure. You've probably seen the remake. They were brought onto that project by William Friedkin. We talked about him last year. Jesus Christ. Last episode. Feels like last year, honestly. They were brought into the project by William Friedkin, and they were going to write and direct the film for producer Stuart Cohen, and they would eventually leave that project. And I couldn't find any information out on why. I don't know if it was just things weren't clicking, the screenplay wasn't coming together. I'm not really sure, but they ended up leaving that project, and which of course left that project in the very capable hands of John Carpenter, who would end up creating, one of his best films, in my opinion. Then after leaving The Thing, Hooper discovered that there's an old project that he'd been attached to that had started to gather steam following the success of Salem's Lot. That project was based on a screenplay written by Larry Block entitled The Funhouse.
Who will dare to face the challenge of the Funhouse? Who is mad enough to enter that world of darkness?
Something is alive in the Funhouse. Something not alive like its father. Something better dead. Something that has the form of a human, but not the face.
This better be good.
It's gonna be great.
Something that feeds off the flesh and blood of young innocents.
Come on, here we go. This is it.
Something that tonight will turn the funhouse into a carnival of terror.
I don't know what that thing is. We're gonna find it. I just want to get the hell out of here.
The Funhouse, coming soon from Universal Pictures. The Funhouse. It's a carnival of terror from Tobe Hooper, the director who terrified you with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So I don't know a whole lot about this Larry Block guy. I tried to look into him a little bit. He's written some stuff. You know, his IMDb bio says that he was a longtime friend and associate of Stan Lee, and that he wrote many of the early Marvel Comics screenplay adaptations, including Doctor Strange, Fantastic Four, and Captain America. Of course, none of those got made except for Captain America. That was the 1990 version that was directed by infamous B-movie director Albert Pyun. And
It's actually a lot of fun. That's a fun
it's
one.
Not. It's very bad.
No, I didn't say it wasn't bad. I'm just saying.
Yeah, you can have fun with it. It's doesn't he have like ears on his?
Oh yeah, they went for comic book authenticity. So he's got those little wing thingies hanging off the side of his head.
Albert Pyun, the guy who directed that, he's an interesting character. He did a lot of really bad B movies, but stuff like Cyborg. He did a lot of Cyborg movies. Anyway, that's not a rabbit hole we're going to go down, but he is an interesting character in the world of B movies. And he probably thought that Captain America was going to be like his big break, but we all kind of know how that turned out. I'm curious. I mean, I guess the Fantastic Four that Larry Block wrote wasn't the Roger Corman one, because that one did technically get produced. So it exists on like IMDb, whereas Larry Block's Fantastic Four does not. So I assume it's a different project than that Roger Corman one.
Well, didn't they do? There's a Doctor Strange movie out there, like from that time. Well,
is there
earlier? It's
okay. Well, it's not on Larry Block's like IMDb, so I assume that whatever one maybe got done.
Yeah, maybe this was in like an early treatment or something.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not really sure. But anyway, that's just a little side tangent about that guy, because I don't know. There's not a lot out there about him. But he did write the Funhouse, and the Funhouse was to be produced by Derek Power and Mace Newfield. So Derek Power had been a producer on The Dark, which we discussed last week, while Newfield's credentials were a little more, a little more valid, a little more prestigious. He had been the executive producer for Richard Donner's The Omen prior to this. Nice. But it was Power, who was an associate of Hooper's because of his involvement on The Dark, that first brought up the idea to Hooper, or the idea of Hooper directing the film. So he approached another producer by the name of Mark Lester, kind of letting him know, he's like, I told Tobe about this. Toby's interested. Let's see if we can get him on board. Then Newman got involved because he and Derek Power actually shared like an office space. And it was Newman, because of his connections, because of like The Omen, he had done some bigger movies. He was able to get the script in front of executives at Universal after he got involved. So the thing is, when the film was originally being developed, when Larry Block began writing it and when Tobe Hooper signed on to direct it, before Mace Newfield got it in front of Universal, it had been intended to be just kind of a low budget horror movie with a shooting budget of about $400,000. But once they got Universal involved, Universal's like, all right, yeah, we'll do it. And the budget kind of ballooned. It became a studio movie, and it all of a sudden had a budget of $3 million.
Wow. Which
is still not like a huge budget, but compared to $400,000, it definitely is.
Yeah. Tobe Hooper don't work for less than $6 million.
He only works for less than $6 million, it seems like. Here's a fun little story about the script. Or about the writing of the script in Larry Block. When Larry Block signed on to write the script, he was offered a rate that was based on the film's budget, which at the time was, like I said, $400,000. So he got paid like a few $1,000. Mark Lester says that he got paid $5 or $10,000, but when the budget went up to $3 million after Universal got involved, Block's pay didn't go up because his contract had been signed prior to Universal's involvement. So he just got paid he kind of got shafted, honestly, because he got paid based on the original agreement.
That's shitty.
But there was somewhere in his contract where he had managed to get a clause in there that said that he owned the book rights to the Funhouse. So when Universal came along, they wanted to publish a novelization, which of course, novelizations, the early 80s, late 70s, all the way through the 90s really were very popular. But Universal decided they wanted to release a novelization of this movie. They had to pony up some cash to get the rights from Larry Block for that screenplay. So he did end up getting paid in the end because of that. But here's where it gets really fun. This novelization was written by a guy named Owen West. Owen West was actually a pseudonym for the horror author Dean Koontz. This is very early on in Dean Koontz's career, and he was writing under other names and doing things like movie novelizations.
Nice.
If you've watched the movie, which we'll discuss the movie in more in depth here in a bit, but if you've watched the movie, and hopefully at this point, if you're listening to us and you have, then you know that this is a film that's a little bit light on plot. Kids go to a carnival, they get terrorized. That's all you really need. That's what the movie's about. But if you're writing a 300-page novel, you got to flesh things out a little bit. So that's what Dean Koontz did. So in the book, the character of Ellen, which is Amy, the main girl, her mom, who's barely kind of a character in the movie. But in the book, she's like a major focus. She's like one of the main characters.
Yeah, because, well, you'll tell him.
What?
I don't know. I was just thinking about it because I was reading about the book today. So I was just thinking, I was like, I guess you're going there. But,
yeah, I mean, you can jump in if you want.
I just, no, I'm trying to get amped up, man. I'm trying.
All right. Well, I'm just going to keep going then.
All right. So there's a reason she's drinking, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, because you do see her in the movie with a drink in her hand and seems to be drunk every time you see her. And she's kind of a shitty mom, it seems like, too. But in the book, she's got this whole backstory where in her early 20s, she was married to a man named Conrad. This is a character from the movie, but he never gets named in the movie, but he's the guy that we know of as the carnival barker in the film, the main one.
Oh.
So in the book, in her backstory, the two of them had been married and they had a child. And that child had come out as more of a creature than a human. So she murdered the child and then was like beaten, like had the shit beaten out of her by Conrad, by the barker. He was, he wanted to murder her. He wanted to kill her because she had killed his son, who he like loved,
Yeah.
But he ultimately like opted for like doing the long con instead. He's like, he's going to let her go in the hopes that down the line she would remarry and have other kids. And then one day the carnival would come to the town that she lives in, the carnival that he works for, and she would be able to like torture and murder her new kids that she cares about.
Meanwhile, everybody that worked at the carnival with him was like, I don't know, man. That's we
seems like a long shot.
That's a lot of stuff that's going to go into that plot, buddy. You got.
Yeah. Well, it turns out it worked out for him because the carnival does come to her town, and then Amy, Ellen's daughter, Amy, and her friends happen to visit that carnival, and and then Conrad and his new son is a different son who is also deformed like a monster. Honestly, Conrad should maybe stop having kids because I was about to say
he needs to go to a doctor, jerk off in a cup, and see if they can figure out what's going on with his stuff.
If your kids keep coming out like this, then there's something going on.
You have what is called demon seed.
Fool me once, shame on me. Shame on you. How's that go? Fool me can't fool me again.
Yeah, fool me can't fool me again.
But so Amy and her friends come to town, and his plan works. So he gets to hunt down, these kids and torture them and kill them. It's stupid and wild, but the novelization is so wild that people initially thought that Hooper and Universal had bought the rights to an existing book and adapted it to a film, and then just cut out like all the backstory stuff and just focus on the carnival stuff. Because in the book, it's like a 330-page book, and the carnival stuff takes place in like the last 30 pages of the book. The rest of it's all backstory. So people thought that they had just bought the rights to this novel and then cut all that stuff out and just focused on the carnival stuff in the movie. But that's obviously not the case. But it was kind of that rumor was kind of spurred a little bit by the fact that the movie would end up being delayed So the novelization came out much, much sooner than the movie. So the book was on the shelves for quite a while before the movie came out.
Huh.
And as a Dean Koontz novel too, or Dean Koontz has a lot of fans, so it feels like
at the time it was a Owen West novel.
Well, I mean, but now like you when I look this up, you see a lot of people talking about this novelization more so than you would normally. I mean, not at the time. I mean, at
the time he wasn't very well known, but after Dean Koontz got kind of well known later on, as they started reprinting this book, they definitely capitalized on the fact that it was a Dean Koontz book and started putting his real name on it. So back to the film. Cast in the film's lead was Elizabeth Berridge. This is only Berridge's second role. She had a small part in a movie called Natural Enemies a couple of years before, although she would later become probably best known for her role in Amadeus, where she played Mozart's wife. She was really young in this. She's only 18 in this, which makes that first scene she looks very young.
Yeah, she looks really young. I was like, wait a minute.
Other cast members included Cooper Huckabee, Miles Chapin, Sylvia Miles, and in a small but memorable role, William Finley, who we last saw in another small but memorable role in Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive, where he was eaten alive.
Now he gets to be a wacky magician.
Yeah. He got to learn all that stuff. Like he got to be taught how to do magic tricks. They had a magician come in and teach him how to do all that stuff.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting with this is that because of that kid, had to go to the East Coast for most of the shooting, or the child labor laws on the West Coast.
Yeah, they had to shoot. They couldn't shoot in LA because they were only allowed to shoot. You're only allowed to legally shoot with kids like during certain hours, and I guess laws are different, like on the East Coast and West Coast, or maybe it was just because of the time of year or something. I'm not really. I couldn't really pin down exactly why, but yeah, that's the reason they give for shooting this on the East Coast instead of the West Coast is something to do with child labor laws, and they couldn't because of the kid, the younger brother. They had to shoot. Normally, you can't shoot with kids like in the middle of the night. You can't do night shoots with them. They can't shoot after a certain time. So
right.
So then, in another role in the film, the role of the Barker was Kevin Conway. Kevin Conway was a stage actor who'd appeared in a handful of films in the decade leading up to the Funhouse, although his career, if you look at it, like he's one of those guys that I look at his filmography and I'm like, this guy should have been like a really like well-known character actor. And he was a character actor and he did get work, but I feel like his career never really took off the way that I think it should have, because he's one of those very captivating, very kind of, charismatic film presences, so he's fun to watch on film. He did, though, appear in Star Trek, on Star Trek The Next Generation, as a clone of Kalis, which is a pretty big character in Star Trek lore.
Yes, he is.
So after scouting locations, they've decided they're going to shoot on the East Coast. They end up settling on a filming location in Florida, just outside of Miami at Ivan Tors Studios. Ivan Tors is where they shot Flipper. They actually took a 1940s era carnival. This is in the off season. They're shooting in the off season, so the carnival's not being used. Is this carnival that was located in Akron, Ohio, and they rented it. They pack up the entire carnival, and the carnies came with them, and they moved it and rebuilt it on the studio lot in Florida. So they actually hired the carnies to set it all up and make sure everything was working. They set it up basically as if it were a working carnival, just in Florida instead.
Wow, blends to the authenticity for sure.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it looks like they just found a carnival to shoot at. It really does. And the main ride, though, the Funhouse, where the film's creature lives, was built from scratch. I mean, they built a facade for that didn't exist in the carnival, with the big fat lady, animatronic, which I love. I think it's a great visual. But and then they built the interior on a soundstage. Of course, it was once again designed by production designer Mort Rabinowitz, who we mentioned Mort Rabinowitz last week because he worked on Salem's Lot with Tobe Hooper.
He built the house.
It should be noted. Yeah. He built the house. But it should be noted, like, we didn't really mention this, but Rabinowitz is he's kind of a big deal in production design. He had won an Oscar in the late 60s for a movie called They Shoot Horses, Don't They? So this was, they're getting production design by an Academy Award winner And his work here is just stellar. I mean, we talked about the house, and we've talked about production design a lot on this series because it seems to be a big thing for Tobe Hooper, but we talked about his house design for the interior of the Marston house last week. And like his work here is just as good, man. Like, I just think he is doing some really, like, it adds so much to the movie, I think.
Oh,
He puts more work into it than carnies would. I don't know how many state fairs you've gone to, but the idea that these carnies put together a 3-story building with working offices and whatever the hell was going on in that basement. Giant gears and everything else. I'm not sure.
Doesn't seem like an easy one to tear down and set back up in a new city.
Right. I don't know how many trailers that funhouse takes, but
and the creature, by the way, he has a name. I can't ever remember the creature's name, but they mentioned his name in the movie and I have no idea what it is. But the creature was designed by Rick Baker, the legendary Rick Baker, one of the greatest creature designers of all time. Baker was still fairly early in his career at this point, although he had already made his mark on movies like Larry Cohen's It's Alive and the 1976 remake of King Kong, which is probably his biggest work up to this point. Well, I mean, that movie was huge when it came out. And then when the Funhouse was released in theaters, another film with creature effects by Baker was also released. That was American Werewolf in London. It was actually released on the exact same day as the Funhouse, which is wild. Now, because of Baker's previous commitments to other projects, including American Werewolf, he wasn't actually able to build the creature for the Funhouse. He designed it. And then he passed his design along to Craig Reardon, who we talked about last week. And then Reardon actually cast and molded and painted the creature head based on Baker's design. It's a great creature design.
It is. It's really cool looking. And Hooper even says in the commentary that Rob Bottin comes by and helped out with some of the makeup on set. And I thought that was kind of neat. He's not credited in the movie or anything like that. Yeah,
I think he was just maybe helping out. And Rob Bottin, of course, this is a year before The Thing, but Rob Bottin was actually also, so originally the plan was for him to actually play the creature. Like he was supposed to be the guy in the mask.
Because he's 6'9" or something like that.
Yeah, Rob Bottin's a really big dude.
He said he saw somewhere along the way, Hooper saw a mime, or maybe just, I don't remember exactly where he said he was, but it just had these spider-like movements, and he just thought it would come across creepy or just be able to portray the character under the mask. Yeah.
That mime is a guy named Wayne Doba. So he ended up getting that part and even though he's much smaller, but you want somebody who is able to emote silently, which is all a mime does, I guess. But, so they got him to play that role, and I think he does a good job. I mean, I think the creature is very memorable in this. I think the design, Rick Baker's design and Craig Reardon's execution is really good. The way it was originally described, I guess, in the script, he was kind of described as being more just like a deformed, someone with just a birth defect, like a cleft palate kind of thing. And Rick Baker didn't want it to look, he felt that was a little mean,
that makes sense,
because there are people suffering from, that kind of birth defect. So he kind of made it more monstrous and less human looking because he didn't want it to come across as mean spirited, calling someone with an actual physical deformity, like a freak or a monster.
He was woke before woke was a thing. Look at that. He was being thoughtful.
Like all of Hooper's previous films, there is a striking visual element to this film, I think, maybe even more so than anything Hooper had done before. And I think a big reason for that is the cinematography by Andrew Laszlo. Laszlo is another dude who, you look at his filmography and it's pretty amazing. I mean, after this, he did lots of movies, but movies like First Blood, which of course Hooper was originally attached to.
Yeah.
Poltergeist 2, which also has its connections to Hooper, Inner Space, and Star Trek V, The Final Frontier.
Fun.
There you go.
Yeah.
He had definitely seen it work on the Warriors, though, and he talks a little bit about just being the vivid colors and that sort of thing.
Laszlo did a lot of movies for Walter Hill, the director of the Warriors, but yeah, it was the Warriors specifically that kind of got Hooper's attention because he liked that bright comic book kind of color palette of that movie.
Yeah.
And that's what he wanted to do for this. And this also marked Hooper's first anamorphic widescreen production. The first time that he'd done a movie in full widescreen, like 233, you know, the widest possible anamorphic widescreen, which, I mean, it does really elevate the movie, I think, because it makes it, I don't know, there's something about it that you could do the same script probably for $400,000 and it'd be on a grainy little film stock and still be enjoyable, I guess. But I think there's something about how legitimate they were taking, how serious they were taking this, that by hiring someone as good as Andrew Laszlo, I mean, he's got all those colors and lens flares, and like, it's a really good looking movie, and this amazing production design and shooting it in widescreen, which forces you to really frame things in a very cinematic way, that it kind of legitimizes the movie a little bit more than it might have otherwise. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, and all these people, like you said, just working on it, they all were like fans of what's the movie he kept saying, Nightmare Alley, and just being kind of fans of that carnival aspect, and with the apparent focus that Hooper has, like you brought up earlier, with location and these, you know, just the set. It's kind of interesting. Everywhere else has been sort of closed in for like some of these things he's focused in on, like as far as, you know, the Sawyer house, the Marston house, or the hotel in Eaten Alive. You know, there's like these specific spaces, but and this one gets there, but like the carnival is like such a broad place to look at, so that anamorphic widescreen, I think, helps really show like the size of the spectacle, and you could get lost in it, basically. Yeah, there's this one crane shot in it where it kind of cranes over the whole carnival and you kind of see everything, and it's just such a great shot, and one of the smoothest like crane shots like that I've ever seen. I think it is exceptionally well done. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, that's one of my favorite shots, I think, or one of my favorite parts of the movie is just like where they're deciding to hang out or whatever, but then they're looking at the puppets and this weird stuff in the scary ride, but the park starts shutting down and the lights go off and the puppets just kind of slowly, like creepily just like close down, and then there's just as that shot's like panning back, like it's just like it went from being this crowded place to like just like, I don't know, like deserted, and just like there's something creepy about an empty carnival, you know. Like carnival is noises and music and people and like laughing, and you know, and then when it shuts down, it's like some places, like once they shut down, because some environments they're so just like filled with sights and sounds that once everything's turned off and their people are gone, they become really eerie, like a mall. Like if you were to go to a shopping mall and after hours and everything's closed down, like it would be creepy, not because it's a mall, because malls are not inherently creepy, but just because it's such a vastly different experience than what your brain is used to for a mall. Yeah. Then you do that with a carnival where you've also got creepy like animatronic puppets, and you know that there's a barn over here that has a 2-headed cow in it. Even if he's been put up, you know he's still there. That was a real cow, by the way. Yeah, all of those animals.
that was something I was going to ask. Was like, is that real? Because it looks real.
Yeah, it was 100. If that had been an effect, they would have won an Oscar for this. That was a real 2-faced cow. Yeah, it was wild.
Wow. And the one with the upper part of its jaw like missing, sort of, or like split. No, everybody seemed to have like their own little demands, you know. I don't remember if we said it, but with like Kevin Conway, you know, he agreed to do it because Hooper would let him play all 3 carnival barkers or whatever.
Yeah, right? That's something that's fun in this, is that you don't really realize it at first, because I think the nudie show guy is the first one that you see, and he's got kind of a wig and a mustache on. But then you see the other 2 and you're like, oh, man, they look really alike. Then you realize that it is, in fact, the same dude. There's really no reason for that other than I think he just thought it was going to be fun.
Yeah, I think he just thought it would be fun to like interact with what's-her-face, that they all like 3 stare at her and like maybe
they all kind of make eye contact.
Yeah, so that it almost would be like kind of weird that like there's something eerie about for her, like seeing them. Yeah. I saw like a little interview with Conway about it, and that was, I think, kind of his thought process on it. But But as far as like the demand thing, I mean, you know, the anamorphic widescreen was a request from Hooper when, you know, he's getting to sign on to this studio thing. He said he'd always wanted to do that. And he had like a little viewfinder. He said since he was a kid that he kind of saw his world in anamorphic widescreen. Yeah. And so like he always wanted to actually shoot a movie that way. And so this was his chance to finally get to do that.
Which is so different from his last project where he was not only confined to a smaller frame, but a much smaller frame because it had to be framed for television.
Mm. Right. He did, you know, in some of the stuff I read, he talks about the one of the big things that Salem's Lot got it besides a success for him was, you know, these requests, these kind of things were things he learned to work out because he learned to deal in the studio system. Like it right. kind of got him experience dealing with these people and how to talk to them and make arrangements for these kind of things to happen.
Yeah. He wasn't afraid to make those demands now.
Right.
So by all accounts, the shoot on the Funhouse was a pretty quick one with only a few minor holdups involving overtime. It did end up running about 7 days over schedule. So it was originally slotted for 30 days, ended up shooting for 37 days, which is the exact same amount of time that Salem's Lot shot. So, of course, this is a much smaller movie, so it wasn't quite as frantic. But because of the film going over schedule, Hooper actually had to leave the country not long after assembling a rough cut because he had a prior commitment in England, in London, to helm a movie called Venom. So he assembles a rough cut of the movie. It's not completed yet. Flies off to England to shoot another movie. But there are some conflicting stories about Hooper's involvement on Venom. Some say that an illness in Hooper's family caused him to have to return to the U.S. and turn the film over to director Piers Haggard, while other stories say that cost overruns and production problems plagued the film and that Hooper, quote, failed to weather the storm, which resulted in him being fired and replaced by Haggard. And the reason I mention that is because this is sort of a thing that we're starting to see a bit of a trend with Hooper. You know, he gets attached to a lot of projects and ends up leaving them or not completing them, you know, and it does not help his reputation in the long run. I don't know if he's difficult to get along with or if he's just on a different wavelength to where certain producers and him don't mesh. I don't know, but it's something we continuously see. And these are characteristics of Hooper that I think are going to play into some of the controversy that we're going to discuss next week. I think that things like this build up, and this is part of where the story behind Poltergeist, you know, where it kind of goes.
I was just going to say, I think he's easy to like dislike. Like, I mean, as far as on set and these sorts of things, like, he seems to get in a zone. I don't mean he's easy to dislike, like he's a shitty person. I just mean like he's easy to misunderstand is maybe right. the better way to put that. That he seems to get focused. He told a story in one interview about this movie that like there was a reviewer that had, you know, he doesn't read many reviews, but this one reviewer had written like a great review of Salem's Lot. And he invited the guy on set. He wouldn't say who or which magazine it was for now, but he said that the guy came to the set for the Funhouse and got to hang out and was going to be writing about it. But he said that he wanted an interview with Hooper and Hooper just didn't have time. And, you know, told him, sorry, like that part's not going to happen. Said the guy just like got mad at him and went back and rewrote his Salem's Lot interview for the next issue of the magazine.
Oh, wow.
That's so shitty.
I know. It's so shitty.
What a dick.
That's what I'm saying. He's not having great experiences either. It seems like I don't know. It just feels like he gets shit on even when he tries to be nice. So
wow, that really sucks.
Maybe he comes across as a dick.
Well, anyway, regardless of whatever happened on Venom, what ends up happening is Hooper returns to the States to oversee editing on the Funhouse. So the Funhouse is released on March 13th, 1981. It's released to mostly positive reviews, a decent box office. It made almost $8 million on a $3 million budget, so it wasn't setting the world on fire, but it was considered moderately successful. Although now it is mostly considered, much like Eaten Alive, kind of a lost Hooper film. This is not a film that people really talk about that often. But I bet there are some people on the internet that like to talk about it, Gary.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
we're on the internet talking about it, but
we're not the only ones, though. And, the thing is that bad reviews, as we found, if you need them, especially with Tobe Hooper, there are plenty of people that need to write them. And it sounds like they also need a nap. This guy sounds familiar, actually. I think I did not intend to do this, but the name is Stanley Strangelove. I feel like I pulled this guy's
guy.
Yeah,
we talked about him last week.
Yeah, he must have went on he's been on a Hooper binge too, I guess.
Weird that he didn't like Salem's Lot, but he just kept going with other Hooper movies.
Stanley Strangelove, please reach out to us online.
He says the title of this review is Not Fun, which I just pictured it that way. Not fun. I wish I'd just left it at that. Anyway, he says, you've seen this slasher film many times before. A bunch of kids spend the night in a fun house. First of all, I have not seen that before.
no, it's not something you see that often, honestly.
Not many times. Like, that's not. Anyway, one of the girls gets to show off her body in the shower for no reason, except the director wanted to see her nude. The kids have boring sex. The kids who have boring sex get knifed by some goon in a mask. The one girl who doesn't have sex does not get knifed by some goon in a mask. Now throw in some puppets with bobbing heads. Why? Who cares? Tobe Hooper, whose only claim to fame is the miserable Texas Chainsaw Massacre, serves up another bomb in Funhouse. The effects are cheesy, which is surprising because Rick Baker did them. Funhouse is unwatchable, boring, derivative, predictable, dull. Did I say boring? Over-talkative, uninteresting. Did I say boring? Funhouse rips off Halloween and Psycho. Did I mention that this film is boring?
You did.
Thank you, Stanley Strangelove.
You did mention that, Stanley.
Guys, I got to come clean. I'm Stanley Strangelove.
Oh, we knew it.
Thanks, Todd. It's good to know. And these, I've got two more quick ones here, and obviously I only picked them for the title, so hopefully the rest of the reviews hold up. This one says...
You haven't read them yet?
I skimmed through them, but this one, the title is Funhouse, more like Scumhouse.
Yeah, that sounds sold. I'm going to watch it.
Don't bother with this one, guys. This movie sucks the big one. Tobe Hooper should be publicly lashed for making this crap, especially after serving us the frightening classic Poltergeist. Well, he did this before. Anyway, Funhouse is about a group of teens that gets locked up in a Carnival's funhouse for the night. Ho-hum. I can't remember who the killer was. I fell asleep, and I really didn't care. The sooner these teens were killed, the sooner the film ended. I gave it 1 star. I don't know. That's
I love these people who, rant about a movie that they didn't even watch the whole thing.
Right. Apparently he does not know that there was even a freak involved. He's just like, I don't remember who the killer was. I feel like he would stand out if you saw him.
Yeah, he's hard to miss.
And this is, what have we learned? Don't steal from Cardies. Should be called Outhouse. That's the title.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Lame-o slasher flick that becomes comical. It's so bad. Teens make themselves targets when one of the group steals money from the carnival ringleader more so than the murder by the monster they happen to witness while hiding in the funhouse. That sentence was poor.
That sentence doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. Apparently witnessing a murder is no big deal, so the teens continue with their makeout sessions unburdened. Most horrifying scene is when Sylvia Miles strips down to a corset, garter belt, and stockings to prostitute herself on a dirty mattress on the floor to the deformed, drooling monster hiding behind a Frankenstein mask and gloves. Vile, disgusting, just plain weird. What happens to the little boy in the film makes you wonder if Hooper wanted us to think something else happened to him. Therefore, bailing on any opportunity to capitalize on that character's development and role in the story. The disconnected, apathetic parents are more revolting than the monster, making the overall film just plain pointless. Check out Elizabeth Barrage in far better works, such as Amadeus. Biggest crime is the opening scene. That's a total ripoff.
We're going to talk about that opening scene. But I mean, I love Sylvia Miles in this movie. She's fun. She is really fun. And she's barely in it, but
yeah, Hooper tells the story that she's jerking off the monster and wipes as she's like wiping her hands on the sheet. She turns around to him and is like, "Did I just throw away my whole career?"
And well, I think maybe what he's referring to about the where Hooper wanted us to think something happened to the kid. I don't know. I think maybe he's referring to the carny who like rescues the boy, maybe, who is a little, he's pretty creepy. It's a little too into like cleaning the child, you know?
All right.
That guy is super weird. That was Mort Rabinowitz's brother, I think, that played
Herb
Rabinowitz.
Yeah. And
Herb,
I think
who
he
names
goes
their
like
children Herb and Mort? Mr. and Mrs. Rabinowitz.
I was going to say the Rabinowitz family. I think he goes by Herb Robin, though. Like he doesn't use like his whole name.
Oh, weird.
And is like, you know, if you want to IMDb the guy, Herb Robins, that's what he's on.
But he is, I mean, he's good. It's just, he's a little, the way he plays it is very like, icky. But so this movie was kind of ignored, or it is still kind of ignored by some people as just another of the like hundreds of slasher movies that were being released in the early 80s, you know, despite the fact that, in my opinion, it's not really a slasher movie. And I will say, I had never seen this movie before. This was my first time watching this one. So I was under the impression that it was a slasher movie. And I think even last week when I announced that this is what we were doing next, I might have even called it a slasher movie. But by this time, and I mean, this is the slasher boom. Obviously, Friday the 13th had already come out. Christmas Evil, Prom Night, Terror Train, My Bloody Valentine, all of these had come out. And they all had that whole like teenagers in peril thing going on that the Funhouse also has. And I think that's why it's why it gets lumped in with those movies, even though there's not really a slasher killer. Though the early scene, that first scene, it's a fun and I think kind of funny, once you know that the movie's not really a slasher movie, it's kind of funny that they did a kind of a slasher movie fake out at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
That is kind of one part Giallo, one part like Hitchcock Psycho, and then like two parts John Carpenter's Halloween. Because it is, I mean, and Tobe Hooper even says it was 100% like an homage to John Carpenter's Halloween. Because he pulls out, it's the point of view, he pulls off the mask, but then the shower scene is very, very psycho.
Do you know that all of the puppets that are in her room there, for some odd reason, they borrowed those from Sherry Lewis?
Really? Yeah, Lamb Chop.
Yeah, Lamb Chop.
No, she was in the demonic puppet. She just in.
Hey, listen, she is an extremely evil sorceress. Like,
Didn't Lamb Chop eventually go on to be in The Witch?
Right, I see what you did there.
Isn't
that's a goat?
Oh,
Todd.
Well, Lamb Chop's a very good actor.
I do like that opening scene, though. I think it's really fun. I think it definitely gives the audience the impression that they're in for a typical slasher movie. And that may not have helped the movie in the long run because, again, this kind of gets lumped in with slasher movies. And the scene was not originally in the script. That was shot like at the end of production. They had done some test screenings and they kind of felt like they needed a stronger opening. Like they needed one of those like horror movie, like kind of cold open scenes. Mm-hmm. So they added this scene to it. I
got to tell you, though, if my brother kept opening the shower curtain and fake stabbing, I would have to set up some boundaries.
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't seem very disturbed by the fact she doesn't try to like cover herself up when she notices when it's her brother. Like she just screams at him, and it's a very odd scene. He's a creepy kid. That's a creepy kid.
That whole family seems dysfunctional. And,
I mean, Amy's the most normal one of the bunch, really. But her mom and dad are very disinterested. Her brother, I don't think he speaks a word the whole movie, does he?
Oh, does he?
I don't think he does. I don't think he ever speaks a word. Yeah, because you just kind of see him sneak out of the house, and he's by himself at the carnival, so he's not really talking to anyone. And then he gets traumatized. I don't think he ever speaks a word. It's very strange.
That is very weird. But he's going to grow up to be a serial killer. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's part of it.
Yeah,
yeah. He was practicing in that opening scene. There's a sequel to this somewhere where he's the killer. It
is interesting though. Like, I mean, do you think you're talking about the slasher thing? Do you think Hooper's trying to make a slasher here? Like, this is his version of it?
I don't really know. I don't really think Hooper thinks in those terms, really, you know? So I think he's just trying to make the Funhouse. It is what it is. I don't think he's necessarily trying to do a slasher thing. I mean, it does have some tropes of slasher movies, like you've got basically with teenagers being killed off and by a maniac or whatever. But it also, you've got these like slasher movie tropes that the movie really, it kind of upends them immediately, because you've got your final girl, Amy, shows her boobs in the very first scene. Final girls don't do that, right? Final girls don't do that.
Well, it's just interesting. You think with the Psycho or the Halloween homage, like there's...
but that was an afterthought too, you know?
Yeah, true. So I don't know. It's weird because it seems like maybe he was trying to set up for that, but he doesn't, like you said, maybe he doesn't think in those terms. He clearly doesn't want to do like a killer, what people would expect from a slasher, like the killer walking around killing people. The killing doesn't even start till later in the movie. And, you know, it's just, he's setting up atmosphere and you know, he's got his way of doing these things, and he's sticking with it here.
Well, yeah, I think the thing with this movie is that it really is kind of like for a lot of the movie, it feels like a hangout movie, you know? It's just about these teenagers hanging out at the carnival and the things that they're seeing. They're seeing all these different attractions, and it's kind of like there's not a lot of horror going on other than when you occasionally will cut to Sylvia Miles's character, like you see her get killed and stuff, but it's not really doing a lot of horror stuff until the end, although it's still got a kind of a overall atmosphere, which again, this is, you know, something we keep saying on these Tobe Hooper movies is we talk about the atmosphere of the movies, but it's a really interesting structure to this, because it really is just about these teenagers hanging out until they witness something that they're not supposed to, but that happens a good ways into the movie, you know? So I almost feel like he threw that opening scene in to show you like, oh yeah, this is a horror movie, even though this is a fake out, like it's still a horror movie opening, but it does kind of set almost unfair expectations for the viewer, because you're expecting one thing and getting something totally different, you know?
Doesn't seem to be very many good people in this movie either. Like that kid's just like walking along the road, and the one guy starts to pick him up and then just pulls a shotgun out or something,
and then just laughs at the kid because he scared the shit out of the kid.
Yeah, that's just kind of fucked up. But by the way, too, we didn't mention this, but Hooper, you know, during the making of this movie, he's also dealing with the fact that he almost dies twice during the filming of the movie. One because Hooper does. Once is during that scene they were talking about with the truck, and he apparently got bit by a brown recluse on set. And had a hole in his hand, he said.
Jeez.
And the other one was he said they were filming some stuff in the carnival, and an extra lunged at him, and he freaked out like, why is this guy coming at me? And it's because a huge piece of one of the rides, this feels more like accurate to real life what I remember of carnivals, it comes flying off of the ride, this huge piece, and it hits something behind Hooper, but is bouncing back at his head. It's about to hit his head, and the extra lunges out and sticks his hand in front of it to like knock it away, and saves Hooper. Says it could have saved his life. It broke the extra's arm.
Jesus,
that it hit.
They better give him a bonus.
Yeah, no kidding. So
that's crazy.
Thought that was kind of wild. My other favorite story from the making of, though, by the way, I meant to mention this earlier too, is he said the scene where they're smoking pot behind the tent,
which is another slasher movie no.
Right, exactly. He says they shot that like 5 times, and he said that so the take you're seeing is probably like the 5th time. He said what was really weird about it was as they were filming it and they're panning back, and the kids are starting to walk back towards the carnival, it starts raining. And he's like, wow, this is weird. It's not even supposed to be raining right now. And so then he realizes, he looks up, he sees it, this doesn't look like rain. And then looks up and realizes that one of the rides, the spinning, the one that's like spinning around with the cars that are also spinning around.
Yeah.
It's like the AD never yelled cut on that ride during the like 20 minutes it took to shoot that scene where they retook it 5 times.
Oh, shit.
These things are supposed to go like 4 minutes at a time, but these people have been in the middle of that ride the whole entire time, and they're throwing up.
Oh no!
Freaking out. So,
oh god!
So
they're getting
like,
puke rained upon them.
Oh god! They cut it, and they had to get an ambulance out. Like the people couldn't walk. They couldn't do anything. They've just been running the whole time. They were.
Oh man! So I want to go ahead and do. We actually forgot to do this last week, but our segment called
Further Viewing.
We forgot to do it on Salem's Lot, guys.
Oh,
can you believe it? I realized it after we had gotten done, but whatever, maybe.
Sorry, you're not gonna
watch Nosferatu or something.
I was gonna say we're not gonna have any vampire movies to recommend.
But this one, I want to go ahead and do it on this one, even though it might be a little bit early normally for us to do this, but I think it's going to play into some conversation about this. So I want to go ahead and say, for my further viewing, I want to stay away from slasher movies because I don't really think this is a slasher movie. I think this is a monster movie. And I think it's a movie about a somewhat sympathetic monster. I mean, he's definitely still bad. He's definitely evil, but he is also one that is, so I think he's supposed to be somewhat sympathetic. And I think that is based on some of the iconography of that Hooper puts in the film, one of which is going to be, I guess, a movie that I would be one of my further viewing choices, which is the original Frankenstein. Although oddly, the Frankenstein poster that's in this movie is actually the Lon Chaney Frankenstein, not the Boris Karloff, but that's kind of an obvious one, Frankenstein, because you see the monster dressed up as Frankenstein. So obviously Hooper is trying to evoke that movie, the classic
the
Universal.
Parents are watching Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah. And because this is a Universal movie, they've got the rights to all that stuff, So I do think that Hooper is trying to make you somewhat sympathize with the monster in this, because Frankenstein's monster is sympathetic, even though he's still murderous and, but he is kind of it's not necessarily his fault. Right. Mm. But if you want to go a little more cult movie, kind of a more obscure, I would recommend Todd Browning's 1932 film Freaks, which I think had to be at least somewhat of like an inspiration on this, because obviously it's about a freak show, and it's about a freak show where the freaks themselves are the most sympathetic people in the movie. It's the regular humans in it who are kind of shitty. So I think that's a pretty good one. If you've never seen Todd Browning's Freaks, I would definitely recommend it, because it's a great movie and is still disturbing to this day. And if I'm recommending Todd Browning's Freaks, I also have to, there's another movie, it's a little more obscure, that was actually directed by Alex Winter, from Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Called Freaked, Freaked. Freaked. Came out in the early 90s, 1993. And it's another one about a freak show. And it is just wild. It is just insane. Like the creature effects are insane. Mr. T plays a bearded woman, I think, in it. Keanu Reeves is uncredited as like the dog face boy. But if you want some like really good creature effects, check it out, because it's like all the freaks in it are very cartoonish, like almost like a Dick Tracy villain kind of cartoonish,
Yeah.
So very, very much like a kind of, I don't know, exaggerated kind of deformity. And then the main carnival barker in it is played by an actual insane person, Randy Quaid. So it's a very fun movie, though. It really is. It's super fun. And maybe, I'm sure we'll maybe talk about it on the show one day if we can figure out where to fit it in. But I would recommend checking that one out if you want something that you may not have seen before.
Yeah, I'll throw Nightmare Alley in there too, since I know Hooper referenced that a lot in some of the stuff I saw on him. as being an influence or something that he was a fan of and thought about a lot when he was making this movie. It's about a carnival, like a sideshow thing too.
I noticed that, you know, all the Frankenstein references throughout, and it made me think of the Frankenstein with Robert De Niro. And I always really enjoyed that one. Huh?
It's not good.
I like it. It's the
Kenneth Branagh one, right? Yeah, Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah, Kenneth Branagh, Helena Bonham Carter. There's a couple other folks in there. Kenneth
Branagh directed it though.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen it in years, but I remember it not being very good. Although I don't know, it might be worth a revisit. I know I love, like, of that time era. You know, Coppola also did Dracula, which is an incredible movie, I think.
Yeah, I always kind of watch those two, you know, as a double feature. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever even saw it, but the idea of Robert De Niro as the Frankenstein's monster, that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's worth taking a look.
Does he have lines, or is he just
he does have lines?
It's much more based on the novel.
Yeah, it's true to the novel.
Yeah.
I have nipples, can you milk me?
Of all the iconic Robert De Niro lines, that's the one.
Well, that's one of his iconic lines, okay? Beggars can't be choosers.
So one thing that I've started to notice about Hooper's work, and something I think that you can probably say about all of his movies up through the Funhouse, is that these are stories about people who kind of live on the fringes of normal society. I mean, you've got the family from Texas Chainsaw. You've got, you know, Judd from Eaten Alive. You've got even Barlow and Straker from Salem's Lot. They kind of are outcasts. These are folks who live kind of outside what is generally considered normal. Killing people and being cannibals is very outside normal, I would hope, for most people. But that is kind of, I think that's especially relevant even with the carnies at the center of the Funhouse, you know. I think these seem to be the kind of characters that Hooper almost relates to. Like, maybe he feels like that kind of outsider. I have to wonder because I think he does seem like he's an outsider at heart. He seems like he's much more at home, you know, making weird little movies, weird little exploitation movies necessarily than like studio movies. Even this as a studio movie feels, I mean, it is pretty scuzzy for a fairly polished studio movie, you know? So it's something that it's funny. It wasn't anything that I ever really thought about with Hooper, but as we've watched this movie, I'm like, man, he really does like to make movies about these kind of outsiders, and he can make them sympathetic, like with the Sawyer family. And I think with the monster here, not necessarily with like Judd or Barlow, they're not sympathetic at all, but I don't know. It was just an interesting theme that I had not really expected to come up when I started watching these movies.
Just the theme of family, you mean? Just
just like the Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah. Too bad Toby's not with us anymore. He could have directed one of those.
Oh my God, that would have been amazing.
If he would have got there earlier too, we would have had like Paul Walker with a deformed Vin Diesel.
Wait, Vin Diesel's not deformed?
Watch your mouth.
Don't speak ill of Vin Diesel in the presence of Gary Horne.
Yeah.
So just as we could have said about Eaten Alive and Texas Chainsaw for that matter, the Funhouse is kind of light on plot. It's light on character work. It is, I think, because it's, once again, this is Hooper more concerned with an experience, you know, a feeling, an atmosphere. You know, like he wants you to feel like you're in a nightmare. Only this time, you know, it's almost like the characters are experiencing this sort of artificial nightmare, because that's kind of what a Carnival Funhouse is, right? This sort of nightmare world that's being created, but it's one that's supposed to be kind of over, supposed to end when the ride is over, right? But for them, when it ends, they find themselves in an actual real life kind of nightmare scenario where they're being hunted by a deformed monster.
When the ride ends, the terror begins.
And I think
you said it like you were like doing it for a comedy though, or something.
Yeah. Oh, like a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
Once again, I think the star of the show here is, which is starting to be a regular thing with these movies, is the production design. You know, Hooper wants to create this this world of his film. You know, we talked about it a little bit earlier in the show, but using both sound and visuals, like he really just creates. He has this way of creating these just surreal worlds that he just drops you right down into, you know, which is really incredible. And this, of course, is very, very different here than what he's doing in, let's say, Texas Chainsaw. It's a much different world, but still that kind of dark, just surreal nightmare world. Like you wouldn't want to find yourself in any of these scenarios.
Yeah, he definitely, and it's that thing too where logically it all doesn't have to make sense, you know, like as far as like, you know, just playing around with it before, but like the idea of how huge that funhouse must be, you know, like they should be able to walk out on the track and it's, you know, there's like 2 minutes of ride, you know,
just follow the track out the door.
Yeah.
It's real easy. There's one way in, there's one way out. It's not like you're not in a maze, but yeah, you're not supposed to think about those kind of things. If you start thinking about those kind of things in a movie like this, like it's, and that's not necessarily to give like plot holes a pass necessarily, but I think that a lot of people put more emphasis on those types of plot holes than they should, because you have to know what, like, you got to consider the intention of the filmmaker. You know what I mean? And his intention here is to take you on a ride, and a scary ride. And that's what he does, I think. Now, before we get any further, I do want to, because Todd, you've been a little bit quiet.
Yeah.
On this. Maybe it's because you're hungover.
I was going to say,
people can't see Justin right now, but he's already just like rubbing his head. So it's just like, I'm not sure my hangover can handle this today.
But Todd, I think it's time to hear Todd's take.
You know, because I hadn't enjoyed many of the Tobe Hooper. Well, I hadn't enjoyed 2 out of the 3 so far. So I was like, look, I'm just going to keep my expectations low or non-existent. And again, just try to soak it all in and embrace it for what it is. And, you know, just see what this is all about. And I had fun with it. I'm not just like, oh, fuck this movie. It's a fun movie. Like, you know, if you wanted to watch it as part of a horror binge during October, it's a good choice. If you wanted to get together with a bunch of friends and, you know, play drinking games or do like your own MST3K riff to it, that it would work for that as well. You know, it's just a fun, you know, Friday night with whoever you're with, and get some pizza and just watch a movie. It's fun. It's not the greatest thing since sliced bread or whatever, but I had fun watching it. There's some stuff that you got to kind of attribute to, like, oh, you know, maybe this doesn't look right, or the creature face kind of looks a little plasticky or whatever. Yeah. But I mean, on the whole,
lots of slobber though.
Lots of drool. But yeah, I had fun with it. So,
well, that's kind of how I feel. Like I would never call the Funhouse like a lost masterpiece. Nobody's going to put this on the greatest horror movies of all time list like they would Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I also don't think it deserves to be forgotten. And I do think it sort of has gotten lumped in with a lot of those slasher movies of the era. Because honestly, this, whether Hooper intended it or not, I think Universal saw this as like a slasher movie. I think they were releasing it and intending for it to be part of that boom because they were so popular at the time. And this is much better than a lot of those. I mean, we talk about movies like, My Bloody Valentine and Terror Train and stuff like that, because those are the better ones that we remember. And Terror Train's not even that good, but those are the more fun ones that like we remember. But like when I say that there were hundreds being released at the time, there were literally like 300 slasher movies released in a period of like 4 years. It's insane.
Wow.
I mean, and the majority of them are garbage,
like really bad garbage. But but it is interesting that in my years of life, this had never been on my radar.
I've always known about it. I actually owned it already because I had bought it as part of like one of those DVD, like it has like 4 movies in it, those little box that you find at like Target or whatever.
Yeah.
And this was one of them. So I've owned it for a while. And then I actually, in order to work on this episode, I bought the Shout Factory Blu-ray, which is actually a really great release. And not that we're like a Blu-ray review podcast, but the visuals on that, like the way they've cleaned it up, the transfer is remarkable. It looks really good, really good. And I'm sure if you go streaming it, it's probably based on that cleaned up Blu-ray.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, it looks great. It really does. The colors pop really well. So you wouldn't necessarily see that if you had watched it like on VHS back in, when we were first getting into horror movies, Gary.
Well, it would have been cropped.
It would have been cropped. So you wouldn't have seen that beautiful like widescreen production. So yeah, because it would have been panned and scanned.
Well, but that's where I was going with that is just that. Yeah, I mean, that's the part of it is like, I thought the movie was fine. I don't think it's like an amazing movie either, but it's just sad what I was thinking of is just that, it wasn't on my radar at all. Like, how have I not really heard much about this film? That sucks. It deserves better than that, because like you're saying, there's a ton of crappy slasher movies out there, movies that would fit this category, I guess. And this one deserves to at least be acknowledged,
because there's some fun stuff. And I mean, I think that Kevin Conway, I think he is really great in this. I mean, I think he's really fun. He's a really good villain. Like, he makes you hate him, man. But there's something about that guy, about his, I don't know, I mentioned it before, but he's just one of those very charismatic kind of character actors. I would have liked to have seen him in more. And I know he was a working actor throughout his entire career. Like, it wasn't like he was out of work, but he's never been a guy that like he seems like he should be one of those actors where it's like, oh, it's that guy again. You see him in these like small but memorable character roles in movies. And I don't know that that's ever the case. I mean, his most high profile role is in one episode of Star Trek where he's under Klingon makeup, right? So,
right. Hooper said he had seen him in a Stallone movie before this. I think it was, I'm trying to think. I looked this up, what it would have been, but he thought he was really, really good in it. Oh, Paradise Alley.
Okay.
Paradise
Alley. Very early Stallone.
Yeah. So this would have been, well, that's the only one that I could find that it seemed like, well, that had Stallone and was before this.
Right.
So,
yeah. I do think though that this movie has, I mean, it has Hooper's fingerprints all over it. It really does feel like a Tobe Hooper movie. He's got this, I mean, he still has that scuzzy exploitation, like just through line through his career, even not necessarily in a little bit in Salem's Lot, especially with that stuff at the end, that last finale. I mean, he could only go so far on network TV, but that finale in the house, but he's got that. The heart of his movie seems to be like he likes these scuzzy exploitation movies. And I don't know that he would consider himself an exploitation filmmaker. And again, this is made for a major studio. This is in fact Hooper's first movie made for a major studio for theatrical release. This is a big studio movie, but it does still retain its Tobe Hooperness. It's got that weird world, that weird vibe that you get from these Tobe Hooper movies. And it kind of plays an interesting part, I think, in Tobe Hooper's career, because even though it didn't set the world on fire, like he was never known as from Tobe Hooper, director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Funhouse. Like you never hear that, but it does play an interesting role in his career, because this movie, along with Salem's Lot, would help kind of bridge the gap from Hooper's early exploitation movie days to his next film, which is a major studio production and the biggest movie of his career.
I meant to mention this earlier, but this was the first movie mixed at the Universal Studios Hitchcock Theater, which I just found like a fascinating little tidbit about it. But because one of Hooper's other requests besides the anamorphic widescreen was he got to do surround sound and all of that stuff. And he was not used to that. So he said this was like you could put everything was on like a huge floppy disk, and you like brought it in. You could put it in there and then mix the sound in the Hitchcock Theater. And I thought that was kind of
this is like state of the art at the time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should mention, because we haven't really mentioned it, but the movie's score, which is very different from, his early horror movies, which were more basically scoreless. It was just like dissonant sounds and Texas Chainsaw and Eaten Alive. He had a much more traditional score with Salem's Lot, of course. The score here is by John Beal, a composer by the name of John Beal, and producer Mace Newfield. He had insisted on them doing an old-fashioned orchestral score, as opposed to like the kind of synthesizer scores that were more common in horror movies at the time. And I honestly think that was a really good decision, because while I love synth scores, they very much date a movie.
Yeah.
They very much make it feel of a certain time. And I'm not saying that this movie feels timeless. I mean, it still very much feels like it's in the early 1980s because of people's dumb hairdos and stuff. But it does, there's something a little bit more timeless about it, because it's shot in a way, it's shot like a big studio production, even though you're shooting kind of exploitation material, but you're doing it like you're doing a big studio movie. And then you add a big orchestral score, just like you would, the biggest prestige production. And the score is really good. I think it's a really good score. And it's one of those things that you don't think about necessarily, but because you hear big, orchestral scores in movies, but if you think about you don't hear them a lot in a movie like this.
Right.
Yeah,
in a little low budget horror movie.
Yeah, it is interesting just how much they put into this. Like you said, like taking it seriously.
It really elevates it to be more than what it maybe should have been, or would have been in other hands, or had it been treated differently, or had it been the little $400,000 production that they had originally intended. It might have been a very different movie. I'm honestly curious about what that movie would have looked like and what it would have sounded like and what it would have felt like, because if you had given the guy who made Eaten Alive that kind of budget to make this same script, I'd be very curious about how it would have turned out. It would have been cool, but I think, but I like the way this one turned out as well.
It's funny too, just that he gets attached to this movie. Not to dwell on it too much, but one of the interesting things I did hear on the commentary too was that he talked a little about, he's lumped into a genre director. We've heard him talk about that before, but he gets asked, why this one? Why would you get into this one? And this is the time of the slasher. Like, this is the perfect time to bring back Leatherface or something like that. Why is he not around? They're working on this. And did they have intentions for this character to be like part of a franchise? He was like, well, we're getting into that scenario. He's like, but he said him and John Milius, the guy who
Milius,
who wrote Conan and stuff.
Yeah.
He said that they had a Texas Chainsaw movie, and they had
like a treatment for a sequel, I think.
Yeah, and they had been pitching it around. He said that they tried like hell to get it made, but
nobody wanted to do it.
Nobody wanted to touch it.
So that's crazy because it's now you've got a successful movie, people are going to jump on it, and people were trying to get him to do. There were years where that's all they wanted him to do was a Texas Chainsaw sequel.
Yeah.
And then at this time, he can't get it done when he wants to do it.
Right.
And
it's
later on down the line, as we continue his story, we'll find out that he does end up making one and kind of makes it under duress, you could say. So here's a fun little side note. So not long after Salem's Lot, Hooper was approached by none other than Steven Spielberg. Remember, they were kind of office neighbors over on the Universal set for a time. He was approached by Steven Spielberg to direct a film called Night Skies. It's a film about aliens who tormented a family, right? Hooper, unfortunately, had to turn it down because he was actually already working on the Funhouse. So he couldn't do this movie for Steven Spielberg, biggest director in the world at this time. But he would, of course, get his chance to work with Spielberg soon enough. So while Night Skies never really came together, it's one of the famous unmade films. Many of the ideas from Night Skies were reworked into two different movies. They took some ideas from this and they put them in a movie that Spielberg directed called E.T. the Extraterrestrial. You may have heard of it. And then they took some other elements of it for the script for a film that we're going to talk about next week for our next episode. in this Tobe Hooper series, and actually the last episode in this first part of this Tobe Hooper series before we take a small detour, we'll say, and that is Tobe Hooper's 1982 hit film Poltergeist.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that next week. If you guys want to stream Poltergeist, it's pretty easy to find, but head to cinemashock.net. You'll find all the information. We've always got links where you can stream the movies, where you can find them to rent or to buy, through the various streaming services. They're on our website. You can also find all of our episode archives there on cinemashock.net. You can find links to our merch. You can find, what else can you find there? You can find places where you can subscribe, and please do subscribe. Please rate and review. And you can find places where you can find links to where you can follow all of us on the social media as well.
If you click just the right spot, you can find nudes of Justin's mom.
Yep. So like one of those DVD Easter eggs from back in the day.
Yeah.
Like where you could, remember the one where you could like watch Memento in chronological order? The hidden feature.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, it's real boring that way. It takes away all of the suspense. Do not do that. Anyway.
For what it's worth, too, by the way, I don't know why I just stumbled into this. I think I was trying to see if you could stream it anywhere because I was thinking about watching something here in a little bit. Nightmare Alley, that movie, on May 25th, 2021, is getting a big Criterion release, it looks like.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
So stay tuned, folks, for that one.
So, hey, where can you guys be found on the internet if people want to follow you?
I am at This Is Gary Horne, all spelled out. I don't know. I just pulled that one. Oh, God, we got to get out of here.
So it used to be Rock and Roll Gary, all spelled out. You had to explain that it wasn't in Rock and Roll.
Yeah, and now I was like, why did I decide to bring that joke or that thing back now? Just now,
you're no longer rock and rolling. You're just Gary Horne.
Especially after last night, I've learned that that's just
I'm too old to rock and roll.
I'm too old to rock and roll anymore.
How about you, Todd?
I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. And if you're interested in Star Trek, you can come find the Computer Resume podcast, where we cover all of the Star Trek franchise in chronological order. And that's at Computer Resume on all the socials.
You can also check out Gary's other podcast. This is Pro Wrestling. They're doing a fun history of pro wrestling, kind of like what we do, with movies, where they're telling a story. Are you doing that every week? Is that a weekly thing?
It is.
The history thing?
We're up to Frank Gotch versus George Hackenschmidt.
Nice.
We worked our way into that era. We're like in the 30s and 40s right now.
Cool.
The first part of it is a brief framework of the history of pro wrestling, and then we're just going to start doing deep dives into actual characters and that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, it was my idea, so you're welcome for that, Gary. I am at Justin_Bishop. My dog's. You can probably hear my dog barking, maybe, because that means it's time for me to go, I guess. We are at cinema_shock on Twitter and Instagram. Find us on Facebook and stuff, too. And until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys.
I'm
sorry,
yawning.
I'm sorry.
I actually feel much better now. This is giving me a jolt of energy. So you guys want to meet up for a beer or something?
Oh, God, no.
This is the most sober I've been doing this podcast in a long time.